Hi, I'm Chris, co-founder at 514, and I want to talk to you about data ingest with Moose. Moose is an open source developer framework built for data engineering workloads. And one of the things that Moose does is make it really easy for developers to capture and ingest and store data in a dedicated analytical data stack or analytics backend. Now, there's a bunch of different reasons why you might need a dedicated analytics backend. Maybe you're powering some data or analytics heavy end user experiences in your mobile app or your web app. Maybe you're building a modern enterprise data warehouse or data lake and integrating data from a bunch of different sources. Maybe you want to power new AI agent or LLM workloads, and you need to surface up rich context and data in order to power those workloads. Regardless of the use case, you're probably aware that a classic OLTP or transactional data stack built on top of a database like MySQL or Postgres is probably not going to scale for the analytical workloads that you have in mind. But maybe you're worried about all the different specialized data engineering tools and technologies that you're going to need to spin up and manage in order to power this new analytics backend in your different use cases. And that's where Moose comes in. So Moose makes it really easy for any developer to create a dedicated analytical backend. And we're going to focus on getting data into that backend in this video. We're going to look at a couple different features of Moose that enable this. So we're going to talk about data models, where you define the schema of your data and create the source of truth for your data. We're going to talk about streaming functions, where you apply arbitrary transformations and business logic to that data as it's flowing into or through your analytical data stack. And finally, we're going to talk about ingest SDKs, which make it really easy to capture data in upstream applications and send that data downstream to your new analytical backend. All of these features come with some pretty cool infrastructure automation and data validation functionality under the hood. So we're going to take a look at that. But let's jump into it and see what it looks like. So I'm going to start here with a brand new Moose application. It's totally empty. There's nothing running here. And as always, I'm going to start by spinning up my dev server. So I'm going to run Moose dev, and what this is going to do is create a local copy of my production infrastructure running on my laptop so that as I'm writing code, I can see those changes happening in real time and actually see what I'm building. With that, I can show you with Moose LS, we don't actually have anything running now, but let's start building. So I'm going to start with building a couple data models. So I'll create a new file in our data models folder here. We'll call this foobar, and I'm going to create my first data model. Now in TypeScript, Moose data models look just like any other TypeScript interface. So I just create a new interface. I'll call this foobar, and now I just need to give this typed properties. So first property will be foo. We'll make this a string. Next property will be bar. We'll make this another string. And it's as easy as that. That's my first data model. I can go ahead and create another one here. So we can do some more interesting things down the line. We'll call this foo_baz. And I'll give this two properties, foo, which is again a string, and baz, which we will make a date this time. Now, the last thing I need to do to finish up my data models and make these functional is decorate them with the key property. So I'm going to import this key from the Moose lib helper library, and then I just decorate one field in each data model as the key. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell Moose that when it creates the underlying infrastructure to power this data model, i.e. creates a table in my underlying ClickHouse database, this will tell it which property to, or which field to mark as the key. So I go ahead and save this, and you'll see that the file watcher in my dev server is going to pick up on the changes and automatically generate the infrastructure to power these data models. So now when I run Moose LS, what you see is that for each data model that I defined, Moose has automatically created a high performance API ingest endpoint in a REST web server. It's created a Red Panda streaming buffer to sit behind that API endpoint so we don't drop data on the floor, even at scale. And it's created a table that's typed to this data model in my underlying ClickHouse database, where ClickHouse is a modern real-time analytical database. It's really cool open source software. Now I can go ahead and start pushing data into this data model. So if I come to Postman and I create a new post request here, I'm sending it to localhost to that foobar endpoint. In the body, I've got some sample strings for foo and a date as a string in bar. I'm going to send this in. I'll push a couple of these in. Let's do like 4 of them. And now when I come to my underlying database, which is that ClickHouse database, you can see here we've got the foobar and foobaz tables have been automatically generated. And when I look in the foobar table, here's those 4 data points that I just pushed in through the API endpoint. So that's data models in a nutshell. We've defined the source of truth for what the structure of our data is, and we've gotten the underlying infrastructure for free from that. Now, what if I want to transform this data or apply some business logic to it? For that, I'm going to use a streaming function. Now, instead of building this up from scratch, I'm going to use a Moose helper function to make this easy for me. So I'm going to do Moose function init, and then I'm going to pass it in the source data model, which will be foobar, and I'm going to pass it in the destination model, data model, which will be foobaz. What this is going to do is automatically generate a skeleton Moose function for me here in my functions folder. So you can see here we've got foobar underscore foobaz was automatically generated. This is importing those source of truth data models for me. And then it's created an empty function that is taking foobar as an input and returning foobaz as an output. And now all I have to do is put in my transformation logic. I can put in anything I want in here, including importing external libraries, hitting external APIs. This is just Python or TypeScript code, so I can do whatever I want. I'm going to show you here importing a external library. And then the logic I'm actually going to do is just map the foo from foobar directly to the foo in foobaz, and then I'm going to map the bar string. I'm going to transform it into a date and map that onto the baz date field. Now I go ahead and save this, and what I can do now is pass in a couple other JSON events into my ingest point. I'm going to push in 2 more. And if I come now into my foobaz table, what you see is for these 2 new events after the infrastructure reloaded, we've got the string passed in, but we've also got the date in a proper date format now. So instead of the string format that we see in the foobar table, we've now got date format in foobaz. So that's streaming functions. We've now defined the structure of our data. We've transformed it. Now let's talk about SDKs. So let's say I've got another development team that's building my front-end application, and I want to capture events from that front-end application and push it into my analytics backend here. That team, of course, can send post requests to these API endpoints, but the much more powerful way to do this is with the Moose SDK. So to do this, I'm going to have Moose automatically generate the SDK for me. I do this with Moose generate SDK. I'm going to specify the language that I want the SDK in. I'm going to do this in TypeScript, which is the language that my front-end application is written in. And then I'm going to specify where I want to actually send this data to. And for that, I'm going to send it to the location of my front-end application, which is called my front-end app. And we're going to put it in source SDK. And before I run this really quickly, I'll show you, this is the actual front-end application. This is just a basic Next.js app. You can see here, this is the source folder that we want to push this new SDK to. So I'm going to run this command. This is going to automatically generate the SDK that uses these two data models that we found and automatically drop it into my front-end application. We can publish this as a package, and there's a couple other different ways you can send SDKs, but this is just showing how you can push it locally to another project. So I come back to my front-end application. We'll see now that in the source folder, we've got this SDK folder, which has the source of truth data models in it. But more importantly, we now have send functions for each data model that was defined in the Moose application. So now, as a developer in this front-end application, I can use these functions to send the data directly into Moose, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if I just go to like a page in my application, the first thing I need to do is import the SDK. This is called ingest client. There we go. And then I'm going to just instantiate the client here, which will look like this. I'll point this at localhost, so if it works, if I want to test it locally. And then I'll define a payload that I want to send in. This is just the JSON payload that I'm going to be pushing into my analytics backend. So this will be foo, and this can just be a test string. And then for bar, I need to pass it in a date. So I'm going to say a new date here. Oh, no, that's not right. This is going to be date.now. Okay, and then I just need to send the payload by using that function. So I'm going to do wait client.send foobar payload. Boom. Now, where this gets really interesting is that my IDE has caught that this payload that I've defined is has a string and a number, but what foobar is actually expecting is a string and a string. So I forgot to convert my date into a string here, add this, and now everything works. And what this shows you is just a bit of the elegant workflow that you get where that other developer team that may not be the expert on what data model was actually defined gets that data validation and type checking at developer time before pushing this into production and sending all the data out, only to find that it's falling on the floor and not landing in the analytics backend. All right, that is data ingest in Moose in a nutshell. If you're interested in more, check out our upcoming videos on data egress in Moose, where we'll talk about how to get data out of your dedicated analytics backend and into your front-end components, into your dashboards, into your BI tools, everything you need to make that really easy. In the meantime, thanks for your time, and keep it moosey out there. Cheers.